Doug Flynn joins us, certified financial planner, co-founder of Flynn Zito Capital Management, to talk about some of the big business headlines of the day. I want to start with Mark Cuban today. You've probably seen the owner of the Dallas Mavericks in the news here the last couple of days. For one thing, because he's selling his majority stake in that team. It gets interesting for two reasons. Number one, it made a huge profit, which always happens when you sell a sports team these days. They're just worth so much money. I think they valued it like $3.5 billion, and he paid less than $300 million. So that's one thing. But you know, it's also interesting that he's selling a team and he's still going to be allowed to run it. What a great deal that is. You never see something like that.
No, leave it to a shark to figure that deal out, right?
Very nice.
That's how this goes. How he was able to do that was interesting. But I think it ties into his vision of putting the team into a place like Nevada, where they have legalized sports betting, and you know, they don't have that in Texas.
I don't think he wants to move to Vegas. The rumors are, or were, that he would take the team, move to Vegas. I think he's denying that, and he's hoping that he could push Texas to kind of bring Vegas there. We'll see. But that, your point is the Adelson family's involved, so I think he wants to see a big casino down in Dallas, which would be a change of pace, to your point.
Exactly. Now, and don't forget that this is the family of the Las Vegas Sands. That's where the money came from. So I don't know how that's all going to play out, but I did some quick math, and I found it interesting. If you do that 22-year compounded return on what he invested and what he's going to get out, it actually works. It sounds like a big number. It's 12 times what he made, but it was over 22 years. That works out to be about a 12% per year return. Okay. And so you know, not like huge relative to the stock market or tech stocks or other things. No, admittedly, not as much fun, you know, to invest in those versus owning a sports team.
Well, that is interesting. The numbers sound bigger, is your point, than they really are.
Exactly. But, you know, he definitely won, and he gets to maintain control, which is very interesting.
Good Shark Tank reference by you, because that was the other thing. He said he's leaving Shark Tank after, I believe, 16 years. So Mark Cuban in the news. Apple also in the news. Apple's breaking up with Goldman Sachs when it comes to credit cards. That was a big deal when they announced that. Remember the Apple Card? So what do you make of this news?
You know, I think Apple will be fine. You have banks and investment firms competing for that business. But Goldman Sachs, to me, they've come into the personal finance and personal credit arena multiple times and then exited. And so they've come into my business and they're exiting. They've come into credit cards and now they're exiting. They've come into banking and they're trying to get out of that. So I don't think they figured out a way to get to the very end user pretty well. And so perhaps Apple will find a better partner that really knows how to do that and make this even more of a success. Most of this success was based on Apple, not necessarily on Goldman Sachs.
Interesting. Maybe Goldman's finding out they're not suited for the regular folk too much.
Exactly.
That has not been their MO over the years. Thought it was interesting. I want to talk about self-driving cars just for a minute, because we used to talk about this topic all the time. Now, GM, there was a headline about GM that they're cutting their spending on self-driving vehicles. I know they had the crash in San Francisco that was in the headlines. You get these headlines, you know, people pay a lot of attention to, and it kind of moves this so-called movement back a few steps. Will we see the day that self-driving really it takes hold in this country? You wonder when you see headlines like this. What do you think?
Well, it's most concerning to me, because if you look at what happened here, the computer, which is programmed, and I start thinking about AI when they start running these things, it tried to avoid the person, but ultimately hit them. But the problem wasn't there. The problem was then it thought, oh, I need to get off of the road. And so it moved 20 feet off the road, which makes sense, except it didn't realize the woman was trapped underneath the car and it dragged her on the ground for 20 feet against the pavement. And so, you know, I keep thinking of these things where it's only as good as the programming is. And clearly we're not ready for prime time with this. And so pulling back a couple $100 million investment means, yeah, we have a lot more work to do in this area, no question about it.
Right. The only way we will be ready, though, I think, is for somebody to keep spending the money and get ready at some point. I've always said about, and I don't know whether it's right or wrong, that the only way this is ever going to work for real is if all the cars are this way. That one of the biggest problems for self-driving vehicles is they have to deal with humans, and we all know how bad a driver many humans are. So if they were all robots and all computers, you might be better off.
That's right. It can't even recognize like police hand signals. If there's a red light and the cops are waving you through, it doesn't know how to handle that. So it does require more investment, but they've clearly said the way they're going. And it's because they don't have the permits now. They can't operate these vehicles. So why spend the money on something if you can't actually operate?
Right. And then, it's kind of the chicken or the egg, and do you ever get to that point? Interesting. Last story for you is this. There's Kraft, which is a big consumer brand in this country. Here's the headline from Kraft. They're going to have mac and cheese with no cheese. So they're getting rid of the cheese, apparently, to go vegan. Now, this doesn't bother me. I hate mac and cheese, which is a weird thing. I don't really like cheese much at all, except for pizza, which is a different story. But I'm sure some other people will be quite bothered by this.
Yeah, I mean, I think two things when I hear this. I think, first of all, plant-based type of foods are an $8 billion industry and growing. Right. They're up about 44% in the last couple of years. So that's, from an investment perspective, it makes sense. They're going with the tides. But I also think, what is mac and cheese without the cheese? It would be like NewsNation without the news. It would be like a lot of other things that come to mind when you think about something that's been a staple for a long time on a cold Sunday when you're growing up. And I thought you loved cheese, Connell. That was what a little birdie told me in my ear.
Oh, the worst. But I love pizza. It's just a weird thing. It's a longer topic. It doesn't make any sense. But, it's just the way it is. Especially mac and cheese, which really grosses me out, even seeing those boxes. Thank you, Doug. We will talk to you soon. Doug Flynn there on all the business news and more.